Hello dear students, welcome back to another video. So today in this session we're going to talk about a new topic, which is the communication process models. Now as we all know that understanding the communication process and its models are very essential for any kind of marketing and for marketers in general. So let us proceed with this topic. So let us see what are the types of communication process models. Now, these models can be generally categorized into uh, three broad categories. The first is the linear models, which basically looks at one-way communication. Then there is interactive models. It includes models which looks at or which focuses at two-way communication, right? And thirdly, there is transactional models. This includes models which are also a two-way communication, but the message eventually it gets more complex as the communication it proceeds, right? Or as the communication progresses. So let us look at each type of models in details. So starting with the linear models, like I've already mentioned, that these are one-directional communication processes, right? That is the communication or the message it passes from one source to the other. So it's just about the transmission, which is why it is also known as the transmission models. In other words, we can say that the message transports or transmits from one communicator to another in order to disseminate the knowledge over space that is available, right? Now, under the linear models, there are researchers, there are social marketers who have dealt with this type of communication. Now, starting with Aristotle's model. Now, Aristotle he has developed uh, a model based on the linear communication, that is one-way communication. Now, Aristotle's model is also known as the oldest communication model, which dated back to 300 BC. Now, this model was designed to examine how to become a better and more convincing communicator, right? Now, what he argues in his model is that we should look at five elements of communication event in order to analyze how best to communicate, right? So these five elements, it includes the speaker, of course, then the speech, the occasion, the target audience, and the effect. Right? So these are the five main elements that, according to Aristotle, is very essential in order to have an effective communication or in order to transmit one's messages very effectively, right? Then he says or talks about another three elements that will improve the communication, right? These three elements includes one, ethos, which is basically about the credibility of the speaker, right? Then there is pathos, that is the ability to connect. Again, it depends on the speaker. And there is logos, there is a logical argument. Now, since it is a linear process, there is one-way communication, the focus or the emphasis is on the speaker, that is the source of the message or the message itself. So three things to make or to improve the communication: ethos, the credibility of the speaker; pathos, the ability to connect with the audience; and there is logos, that means the logical argument that can be put forward by the speaker, right? And besides this, we have already seen the five elements that are essential for a communication, for an effective communication, which cannot be ignored. That is speaker, speech, occasion, target audience, and effect. Right now, keeping that aside, one limitation of this model, of Aristotle's model, is that it ignores the role of feedback in communication, right? So since we have already seen that it's about a one-way communication, so there is no feedback process or there is no rule of feedback. This is what this communication model or Aristotle's model lack, right? Then let's talk about another model which was given by Laswell, right? So Laswell's model is also a linear communication model, which basically attempts to understand a communication event by asking five important questions, right? Now, Laswell, he tried to represent or explain his model by asking five important questions, right? What are these questions? Number one, who created the message, right? So in other words, if we try to compare it with the previous model, it is the speaker or the communicator, right? The first element. So one must focus on the creator or the speaker, that is who created the message, and also maybe possible and relevant questions might come up, like what their biases may be, right? Does the speaker have any biases or any preferences? So that also must be considered. The speaker or the creator of the message, number one question. What they said should be considered as a second question, that is the message itself. How relevant it is, how effective it is, right? What they said, that is the message, should be posed as a second question. The third question that one must ask is about how they said it. Sorry, it should be they. Here it is mentioned as the. So how they said it. In other words, you need to identify the channel they said it through. It can be through a TV advertisement, it can be through radio, it can be through blogs, etc. So this question tries to address the uh, problem or the aspect of the channel of communication, right? But the next question one must ask about is who they said it to. If you compare to the previous model, it talks about the receiver, right, or the audience, which is another important aspect in the communication, right? A message should only be shared to those who are an appropriate recipient of the message itself, correct? So the last question comes about the effect. So what effect it had on the receiver? We're talking about the message here. What effect can the message have on the receiver or the audience, right? So according to Laswell, these are the five important questions that as a communicator that you must focus on, right, to make it an effective communication process, right? Okay. So why is it effective? Now this model, it provides a very simple and practical way of critiquing a message, and it explores five important elements that can help explain the event under analysis in more detail, right? In the previous model, we have seen the source, the elements, right? The elements of communication and a few other factors that can make or improve the communication. But here, as Laswell said, by asking this question, this set of questions, as a researcher or as a communicator, you're trying to dwell deep into it, right? You're trying to, understand about the message, about the receiver, about the speaker in a more deep manner. So this is why Laswell's model is considered very effective under one-way communication. Let us look at another communication model given by Shannon and Weaver. Right, this is another form or type of linear communication model. Now, what does Shannon and Weaver model say? According to this model, communication occurs in five key parts. Right now, what are these five key parts or five key elements? Again, it's a sender, then there is encoder, then there is channel, then there is decoder, and lastly the receiver. So one unique thing that we have noticed here is there is an element of encoding and decoding, right? This is something new which we have seen compared to the other two linear communication process model, right? So what this model emphasizes is on the importance of encoding and decoding the messages for them to be sent. To take a very simple example, it is about turning the message into written words, right? Or maybe turning the observation into some sort of written words or very explicit way. So this is a very simple example that we can think of in, let's say, encoding and decoding of message. Mm. So what happens during this process of encoding is uh, the encoding happens, right? Then sending, then decoding. Then during this process, another important thing that Shannon and Weaver highlighted is the element of noise, which also is another unique feature that we have seen here, right? In the other two models that we have seen earlier, the element of noise was not considered. So Shannon-Weaver model, it states that noise can occur, right? Or noise occurs and it can disrupt or cloud a message. Now, this model was the first to introduce the role of noise in the communication process. Now, in the communication process, we cannot ignore the concept of noise because sometimes, the message can be disrupted by various sorts of noise. Now, let us look at these types of noise. What are these types of noise that come in between the communication process and it can disrupt the process. So talking about the first type of noise, it is known as physiological noise. So what is this physiological noise? These are any distraction that can caused by hunger, fatigue, headaches, medication, and are all other factors that can affect how we feel and think, right? Just as the term suggests, we can think of any sort of distraction that comes out of our bodily elements, right? That's from our physiology, such as hunger, fatigue. So this there can be distraction. For example, if you are in a classroom, right, and the teacher is explaining something, and whereas you feel a deep sense of hunger or a headache, right, then it can ultimately distract you from listening to the lecture inside a classroom, right? So there are a lot of such physiological noise that can happen, which can ultimately disrupt the communication or hamper in understanding the message. The next type of noise is the physical noise, which we all are very aware about. So these are interference in our environments, right? So physical noises can be made by others, or it can be maybe through lights. It can be spam and pop-up ads. It can be extreme temperatures and crowded conditions, etc. So this physical noise, it comes from our environment, right? Sometimes environmental factors that can affect our ability or our uh, the effect of communication, right? All right. So the next type of noise is psychological noise. Now these are qualities in us that affect how we communicate and interpret others. Now, for example, if you are preoccupied with a problem, right? If your mind is full of a problem, right? If you're constantly thinking about a problem inside your head, or if you know have a particular issue, right? And if take it inside a classroom, you'll not be able to concentrate. So you may be inattentive, maybe inside a classroom or at a team meeting, etc. Likewise, prejudice and defensive feelings can also interfere with communication and can bring you an early biased conclusion that others don't agree with. So there's this psychological noise, which is basically about noise that is created inside your head, right? Okay, so last type of noise, we can call it as semantic noise. Now, what do you mean by semantic noise? This can be words that are not mutually understood. For example, the authors or the marketers or even the communicators, they sometimes create semantic noise by using some sort of words or jargons that are unnecessary, right? And it causes certain technical issues in understanding. A very simple example can be use of a different language which the receiver or which the audience do not understand, or use of certain technical terms, or let's say some medical or scientific terms which the common people or the let's say for example the uneducated people wouldn't easily understand, right? So those kind of problems or issues can be regarded as semantic noise in communication, right? Now, these are the types of noise that hampers one's communication process, and this was identified by Shannon and Weber's model. So this is why it is also regarded as a very significant contribution in the communication process model under the linear communication. Now talking about another type of linear communication, there is Berlow's SMCR model. Now, this communication process is explained in 4 steps. What does 4 steps include? Source, message, channel, and receiver. So far we have seen that under linear communication or under any communication process model, uh, the elements are almost the same, right? There will be source, the communicator or the speaker, there will be message, there will be this channel of communication or mode of communication, then lastly there will be the receiver under one-way or linear communication process. Similarly, Berlow also identified these elements and named it as the SMCR. Now, what is unique about this is that it gives a detailed account of the key elements in each step that will affect how well the message is communicated, right? Now, talking about the source, these are the elements. The elements of the source include the communication skills of the sender, their attitude, and culture, right? So here the source basically deals with the understanding everything or every characteristic of the speaker, right? Or from where the message originated, the source. Second comes the message. That is, it includes the content, the structure, the code, which needs to be maybe encoded and decoded. Then comes the channel, that is the mode of communication. It can include the or the channel through which the message passes to transmitted. That is, it can be through hearing, through seeing, through touching, smelling, etc., right? And lastly, the receiver, which includes the attitude, the knowledge, culture, etc. of the receiver or the audience. So how they perceive the message is also important. So it is dependent on the nature, the attitude, the knowledge of the receiver, right? So all this makes up understanding the characteristics of all of these aspects, all of these elements or steps is necessary in order to develop a strong communication. Okay, so now that we have dealt with the linear communication process models, let us move on to the interactive models. So interactive models, uh, like I said, these are two-way communication process. These are best for explaining impersonal two-way communication, right? So what are the models included in the interactive models? The first is given by Osgood Schramm. The Osgood Schramm model explores the communication that is equal and reciprocal, correct? And it does not differentiate between the sender and the receiver. but sees each of it as being in equal position as message encoders and decoders, right? So this model, it does not differentiate between the sender and the receiver. It sees both of them in equal position. If one of them encodes the message, the other decodes the message, right? And it goes in a reciprocal way. So since it's an interactive model, so when a feedback has to be given, the receiver becomes the encoder, the receiver becomes the sender again, right? The other way around. And the sender, the earlier the sender of the message becomes the receiver of the message again, who has to decode it. Now this happens after the feedback is given, right? And it is best for explaining and examining personal synchronous communication where feedback is immediate, or situations such as face-to-face communication or maybe interviews, etc., right? So here the feedback is immediate, right? And the noise can be reduced. The noise that you have seen in the previous model, it can be reduced through ongoing clarification of messages during the conversation. So this is one advantage in the interactive models, because there is a two-way communication going on, there is immediate feedback going on. So there is a chance or a lot of scope to reduce the noises, right? Or to reduce any sort of misunderstanding. Okay. Talking about the next interactive model, it is the Wesley and MacLean model. Now, this model embraces the importance of feedback in communication. So, the feedback element will be common. We can consider it as a common element in all of the interactive models, right? Because it's two-way. It also emphasizes the important role of environmental and cultural factors in influencing communication. So it considers a lot of environmental and cultural factors that affects the communication. It also states that the things we say and communicate are influenced by who we are, what our background is, and what perspective we are approaching issues from, right? Then it also considers the object of orientation, that is the background, the culture, and beliefs of the sender and receiver as well, right? So again, it emphasizes that we need to understand, or we need to consider both, all the details, the characteristic, the nature, the background, everything, the culture of both the sender and the receiver, right? Who they, where do they belong, who they are, and what is the message that they're trying to deliver, and how relevant is it with each other, with the sender and receiver, etc. It further considers the message to have been received and sent within a broader social context that needs to be considered to know and understand the message, right? So this was about Wesley and MacLean model. Then last comes the transactional models, right? Now, like I said, the transactional models are also a type of two-way communication model or two-way communication process. Now, these are direct personal communication where two-way feedback is immediate. In the previous models, or let's say in the interactive models, we have seen the element of feedback, introduction of the feedback element, but there the feedback was only one side, okay, where the sender or the speaker transmits the message and receives the feedback immediately. Whereas the slight difference or the basic difference between the interactive and the transactional model is that feedback here, it is, it's an ongoing process, right? And it's the conversation progresses over time. Let us try to understand these types of models, starting with Berlin's transactional model, right? So this model explores the interpersonal immediate feedback communication, right? The feedback happens, but in both the sides, from both the sides, that is from the sender as well as from the receiver. The central idea is that feedback for the sender is the reply for the receiver, correct? Okay. So As soon as the sender gets the feedback, it has to reply it back again. So there's a constant or continuous process going on. So it further highlights the role of cues in impacting our messages. It can be the role of public cues, also regarded as the environmental cues and private cues. For example, a person's personal thoughts and backgrounds, right? So these are the cues or factors that can affect the message in the communication process. Now, with an emphasis or focus on these cues, this model highlights the factors or identifies a lot of factors that influences what we think and what we say, right? So you can just imagine having a two-way communication, or let's say uh, an interview round going on, right? A face-to-face interview or a direct personal interview going on, where the interviewer asks questions and the interview has to reply it back again. And listening to the reply, the interviewer can ask further questions, right, on the same topic. So it progresses over time. So moving on to the next type of transactional model, which is known as Dance's helical model. So this is known as the helical model developed by Dance, right? This is the name of the uh, developer. So Dance's helical model is based on circular models by explaining how we improve our messages over time by using feedback, right? So it focuses on, or it emphasizes that the communication or the message can be improved, right, as the communication progresses. As we get the feedback, as we receive the feedback or the reply, the message can be improved based on that, because each reply can be considered as a knowledge, can be considered as something new to the receiver, right? So there's a the communication process goes in a circular motion, right? Uh, it keeps on developing. So when we communicate with others, their feedback will influence our next statement, correct? It's very important in a transactional model. The feedback influences our next statement. Now, in these types of models, the messages are not pre-decided or pre-planned, right? Or are not pre-stated. Our reply, the sender's or the speaker's reply, will be based on the feedback given by the receiver, right? So the knowledge increases with each type of communication or each cycle of communication. This is why it's known as a cyclical communication process. It enables us to expand our circle, right? As it is represented by the increasingly wider and wider circles. So this circle of communication or circle of knowledge, it keeps on expanding, right, as the communication moves on or the conversation progresses. Now this movement up the spiral indicates that each communication practice is new and different from the previous, right? Like I said, this type of messages, this type of communication are not pre-planned, right? So it happens simultaneously, and each message, each reply or feedback can be a new knowledge for the other, right? So this communication also moves up in a spiral manner, right? Okay. So this communication does not ever perfectly repeat itself. It constantly and continuously moves upward like a spiral. It whatever you send it, the message that you send it, it comes back to you, right? It revolves, it keeps on revolving around in a circle, which is why it is also known as a spiral, as a spiral movement, upward spiral movement communication, right? So these are the type of communication process models. We have seen basically three types, three broad categories. That is linear models, which deals with the one-way communication. Now in social marketing, uh, linear communication process models will be effective in cases such as spreading of awareness regarding a particular issue or a cause, right? Where only the message is transferred or transmitted to the larger audience, right? Then comes the interactive models, where there's a two-way communication, involvement of the feedback element, and also noise factors, right? So the goal of the marketers will always be to reduce the noise here. Lastly, there's transactional models where the communication or the conversation, uh, it keeps on developing simultaneously, and it keeps on moving forward with the development or with the you know acceptance of knowledge and continuous um, movement of the conversation or the topic itself. So that's all for today. I hope you have gained something out of it, and looking forward to see you in the next video. Thank you and have a nice day.